Okay, my name is Robert E. Fleming. I was born in western Kansas in October 15th, 1930. And we moved to Colorado from Kansas in 1936 and moved to the Littleton area where I went to school. Uh, and after school, I worked for the Denver Water Company and then the Robinson Brick and Tile. And while I was working at Robinson's Brick and Tile, I was doing a lot of dynamite work. So at that time, the Korean War was going on, and I received my draft notice. So I went down for my physical, and they turned me down because my blood pressure was extremely high, and that's caused by your work with dynamite, and which really raises your blood pressure tremendously. So I think that kind of pleased my mother, because I had a brother that was killed in Okinawa during the Second World War. But a friend of mine, Bob Balmer, and I decided that we would then go down and see if we could enlist in the paratroopers. So we went down, and at that time I passed the physical then, because apparently I wasn't loaded with the nitro from the dynamite. And my induction date then was February 19th, 1951. I went to, they sent us to Fort Sill, Oklahoma we was there for 2 weeks. And then was transferred to Fort Rooker, Alabama, to fill in where the Minnesota Viking Division National Guard had been activated. They were short personnel, so the Army was filling in these positions with draftees and enlisted personnel. So I never saw the paratroopers, which was probably one of the best breaks the Army ever gave me. So I received the training there and trained in the artillery. I was in the artillery section there, and was a cannoneer, and then became a truck driver. And while I was there, we went on the Longhorn maneuvers, which were in Texas. That was a big Army maneuver. And there were supposed to be three sections of this maneuver, which they have finally can't, because it became so rough, and there was fighting between the troops, who was the 82nd Airborne was supposed to be the enemy, and so the routine GIs were fighting the 82nd Airborne, and it got so vicious there between them that they canceled the third phase of this Longhorn maneuvers. So we went back to Alabama, but one of the interesting things that happened while we was on this maneuver was the 82nd dropped some equipment close by, and some troops, we went out and recovered a Jeep that they had dropped, and took it back to our battery and painted our numbers on the Jeep and took it back to Alabama. We never gave it back, so we had 2 Jeeps with the same number. I don't know how that ever came out, because they never got their Jeep back. Then my friend Bob Balmer, who was with me, he received orders and was transferred to Germany. I received orders and was sent to Korea. I did over there a year, and we went to Japan, and then went from Japan to Busan, which was the lower end of Korea, and then went by train up to towards the front area, which was at that time just south of the 38th parallel.
You told me that you were assigned to the 213th Field Artillery Battalion, 6 to 7 people in the battalion then, each had 200 personnel or something? What were you attached to?
Well, we were called the detached unit. Now, I don't, there was the first Cav was on one side, and then there was the Korean Army was in front of us, and on the other side was another division of American soldiers. So we just supported them all. So we weren't attached to any particular division. It came about this time, the military forces, they settled on that we wouldn't go past the 15th parallel. And so then we set up our artillery behind we was about 8 miles behind the front line. And at that time we had 155 howitzers, which was medium-sized howitzer range. And later they brought in two 240 howitzers, which is a very large howitzer and very accurate. This 240 howitzer, of course, was the largest land gun that the Army possessed at that time. The Navy would pull in some their warships and shoot with their big guns from the Navy side, but they couldn't reach clear into the center of Korea where we were stationed, and we were right in the middle of the peninsula there. And I got to go down to Incheon to the railhead, and where we unpacked these and brought them back to our area. They were all chasmolined, and they had to be cleaned, and this was a two-piece gun come on 2 large trailers and pulled by a 38-ton track, which is like an unarmored tank. Had very light armor on it, but it looked like a tank. And so I was at that time a track operator, which run, they call them tracks, these tank mobiles, sort of like, that towed the guns, and they had 50 caliber machine guns mounted on them, and light armor around the sides. Instead of like a tank's heavy armor, but these were light armor. About all they'd withstand is small arm fire. And while I was there, they had a 38-ton capacity crane that would take the guns apart and put them back together in the 2 parts. And we had one crane operator that had experience, and he took me out, and we went out and taught me how to operate the crane, and we went out with the engineers. We'd load their trucks with gravel and dirt and whatever they wanted, because it had clamshell capabilities, which is the scoop out in the front. And he taught me how to operate that, and so apparently the first lieutenant had observed that I was going out and learning this. And in the meantime, they had brought over a young fellow who had been trained as a crane operator from the Army base in Missouri, which was the engineers base. And this lieutenant was a West Point trained, very rigid, proper individual. Everything was just right down the line. And this young crane operator made a couple mistakes operating the crane. And one of them was he was swinging the boom over the cab, which is an absolute no-no. You never have the boom over the cab. And the second time he did it, the lieutenant went up, sent him to the wire section up in the front line. And there was one of the soldiers come down to me and said the lieutenant wanted to see me up at the headquarters tent. So actually, I had no idea what he wanted. So I went up there, and he said that this other soldier had been dispatched, and did I want to be the crane operator? Well, naturally, that was a promotion, and I was eager to take over that job right away, which I became the second crane operator. We had 2 cranes and 2 of these 240 howitzers.
What was the range of these 240?
They would go 12 and a half miles and put a 360-pound projectile in the hole every time. They were very accurate. And then they had the powder, and they had it was all mechanical, man-powered. It had a long ramp, and you'd put this 360-pound projectile into this chute, and then they had a long wooden rod with a brass end on it, and 4 guys would be on this rod, and they'd shove it up into the gun. And it had a brass ring, which when they shove it in, it would lock it in place. And then they had the powder came in 5 bags, and you took off a bag for how far you wanted it to go. You'd take off 1 bag, 2 bags, 3 bags, if you that would determine your distance you was firing it.
How big a crew did it take to operate this, and how big a shell was it? Could you show us?
Well, the shell was about this long. It was a big shell, 360 pounds. And they had this little cradle that you would roll the shell over, lay the cradle, the shell in the cradle, and these guys would carry it up and put it in this ramp because you couldn't lift it. As the crane operator, though, when they brought them in, I would run up there and had a hook on the end of the crane, and you would lift 4 of these shells at a time and set them on a platform near the gun.
How quickly could they reload a gun after they fired?
Well, I'll tell you, the shell weighed 360 pounds, and a full load of powder weighed 90 pounds. And they had these, they called it the tray, and there was 4 men that would load the tray and bring it up, and then there was, of course, there was 2 gunners up there that would set the settings for the gun, and then there would be 4. These 4 would set the tray up. You tip it a little bit, and the tray would go under it, and then you tip it over on the tray, and the handle and 4 would carry it over and slide it in this trough that went up into the breech of the gun. And then they had this long rod, which was about, must have been at least 8 feet long, with a brass end on it. It would fit up against the base of the projectile. And the 4 of them would then ram that up into the breech. But it would probably take at least 4 minutes or so between each round. You'd be surprised how fast you can do that by hand if you're really want to get with the program and shove it in there. On the gun, the top of the gun weighed 16 ton and the bottom weighed 17 tons, so it was a 33-ton piece of equipment, and but very, very accurate, and you had to be right behind it or the noise would deafen you. I think I've got some loss of hearing from being there. If you was in this, they call it the cone, which was a kind of a cone area right behind the breech of the gun, and where you missed a lot of the noise. If you were outside of the cone, it was a lot louder. And
what kind of observation did you have so that you knew where everything was
oh,
going?
well, we had what we called forward observers, and they were right up with the infantry troops, and they would have radios and they'd call back the information and where they wanted the shells, and then they would they call you zeroing in. They'd drop a shell and then they'd say 40 yards to the right, up 2 degrees, and sometimes we had wire up there, and they would be telephone. Well, I remember one occasion our forward observer was in a foxhole for 2 days while the North Koreans had overrun that position, and he was in that foxhole and never came out for 2 days. And then when the American troops recaptured that area, he was, of course, liberated at that time. I was very lucky that they never caught him in there.
Who was your enemy?
Well, they was Chinese soldiers and North Korean soldiers, and one area we shot was behind what's called White Horse Mountain, and the Chorwan Valley sector. That's where we did most of our shot. We moved a little bit from time to time, but we always came back to this one same battery area because the line was stabilized up on the 38th parallel. And so there would be the North Koreans and the Chinese would make a push, and they would push our soldiers back towards us. We still never moved. And then the Allied troops would gather up and push back to the 38th parallel, and then we'd stop. It would just, they just seemed like a rotating force. They'd push us back, and then we'd go to the 38th parallel and quit. There was also a Turkish brigade that was on one side of us there, and they had swords and stuff, and they were known not to ever take prisoners. It was kind of talked about that they never took prisoners. They just killed everybody that they met. Very supposedly a proficient group of soldiers.
What was your living conditions at the time?
Well, we lived in fairly large tents. In my crew, there was, which I was in what's called the ammo crew, because that's where the crane operators worked out of. Because that was the tent was big enough to handle that, and we had there was about 15 in each one in these big tents, and we were dug in. This part of us dug in the side of the hill, and we were lucky because we were behind a ridge, and when the opposing forces was shooting, their shells would go over us and miss us. But we could sit up there and watch what they call, well, this was Baker Battery, and then there was Able and Charlie Battery. And Charlie battery was the battery that was shot up the worst. We lived in tents and they lived in bunkers in the ground, and they were kind of a flat area, and we could sit up there on our hill and see their position down below us. And they were getting shelled all the time, and they lost quite a few injured troops.
You're telling us that your battery was pretty much protected, but that Abel and Charlie got shot up pretty bad.
That's right.
Why didn't they move up and get protected too?
Well, I don't know. That wasn't that wasn't in my providence why they were sitting down there in the open. But we could see the rounds when they come in. Especially you could really tell when they dropped the white phosphorus down, which was because they that big white cloud, and you could see them getting rounds in all the time down there, and that was Charlie battery, and Abel battery was behind us. So when the shells was going over us, there was another ridge that fell down on Abel battery, but Charlie battery is the one that really got the worst of it. However, on occasions, we could wake up and find rifle holes in our tent. But most of those would be above where our bed line was. Seemed to be in the roof line. And the first lieutenant's tent was kind of on a ridge behind us, and every now and then you'd see new holes in his tent, but they were on the low, on the top of the tent. And, they didn't seem to be getting down. The protection was keeping them from getting down on the low side where the personnel was sleeping. We never had any down on the lower end. While I was there, in the crane, I had the truck bed that the crane was sitting on, that I could carry stuff with me when we moved. And our tent, I had built a wooden door, and it's in some of those slides there, that the wooden door I put on the tent, and lined our whole tent with wood, which I got from the 105 Howitzer Company. That was their ammo come in boxes, and they had these wooden boxes. And I went over to their place, and we brought back the boxes and built this frame around us, which gave us some protection. And then we had a door on that we didn't have, that opened like a regular door. That was, we were the only one in the whole outfit that had a door.
You were in a fairly mountainous area. How cold did it get in the wintertime?
It was extremely cold. You go on guard duty and you think you was freezing to death. It was really cold, and it was kind of humid there. You know, there's a lot of rice paddies. You had to be careful if you got off the road. You'd think, in fact, there's you'd see one of our big tracks on one of those films that I have that show them buried in a rice paddy. But it was, I don't know what the temperature was, but it was extremely cold in the winter. And you you were out on guard duty of course you was always in a hole, in the foxhole. You had to be wrapped up or with stuff. It was so cold that in our tent we had diesel stoves, and a tank sit outside, and a little line come in for the heat for the diesel, and the diesel would turn to gel and wouldn't run to the stove. That's how. So we would steal gas from our vehicles and put a little gas into the diesel so it would flow.
Did you have enough cold weather gear to make it, or were you constantly just cold that way?
Oh, it was the winters. I don't think remember wasn't that long, but we had, you know, there was plenty of food over there for the troops. We never had any, went hungry. We did eat some K rations on a few occasions, but most of the time you could, the mess hall was open, and they would put the mess halls down in what they feel is the best secure position from the ammo. Now I don't know where Charlie Battery ate down there, but we were lucky. We had a nice mess hall all the time.
Actually, the question I had is, did you have good cold weather uniforms and gear or boots or anything like that, or could they have been better?
Well, they was pretty good. We had the old wool uniform, kind of made out of this Ike jacket stuff, but we wore those, had the wool pants and had big fatigue jackets, those big jackets and gloves. It's the uniform and the regular boots, regular army boots, and then you had the heavy wool socks. So you, that part didn't bother you.
How about when you were sleeping?
Well, of course you sleeping, you had sleeping bags. Everybody had a sleeping bag, and you slept in the sleeping bag. And when you was in the tent, or in the winter, you took your bath in with your steel helmet. You'd sit that on the stove, and that's where you got your warm water. And you got to, during the wintertime, there wasn't any showers. You just washed in that steel part of your helmet, and you stayed close to the fire, because if you got out away from the fire at all, it was cold. We had one of those in there, and it would burn. It was red hot. The bottom of it turned red. There was one time we had some Korean workers and a Korean interpreter that did the interpreting for the mostly for the headquarters part of our, the captain and the lieutenant and the brass. And one day he was really got excited, and here come this soldier walking down the hill towards our tent, carrying a rifle on his shoulder. And this interpreter got real excited about this, and he went up there and snatched this guy up, and he was a North Korean soldier carrying a Chinese rifle. And of course, they called the headquarters, and it wasn't too long, there was a Jeep showed up, and they took this soldier away, and that never heard any more about it. That was the only thing I ever heard. And I think possibly he was trying to defect or something, because he just walked right into down the hill toward our mess tent. And that's where the headquarters, of course, always stuck around the mess hall.
So this guy wasn't firing, he wasn't doing anything threatening, he was just kind of walking down the
He's just walking there with the rifle on his shoulder, just like you, with the sling on. Yeah.
Do you have any idea where the enemy, whether it be Korean or Chinese, how they were protected themselves? Were they tunneled, or where are they at?
Well, there was a large hill about 10 miles from our battery, and there was tunnels in that, and they had tunnels was facing the American side, and they had artillery in there. In these tunnels, they pushed the artillery out, and they would fire when they would make one of their pushes, and they would come out and fire, and when they started firing, we started firing at those holes. And once you zeroed in, we could block the hole up. But within a few days, they had it dug back out already. I don't know how many people they had up there with shovels, but they would dig out these tunnels and be ready to fire again. I think when we started firing, they would pull their artillery back out of the, so it wasn't damaged. But we'd shoot up, block the hole up, and that was a routine thing. We would be shooting at those holes up there.
By the same token, couldn't they zero in on you?
Well, they did on these other batteries. But this hill kind of protected us.
You were talking about bullet holes in your tents. If you're protected by this hill, where does small arms fire come from?
Well, that we never were too clear on how they had to have some snipers that were sneaking in the area and shooting. Unless some other American soldiers were trying to do away with the officers or something, but that was really never suspected. They thought they would have some infiltrators that come in and would at night and try to and be just using small arms.
Didn't you have an AWOL story that was not criminal in nature but more accidental?
Oh, well, that's when I was with the 47th Viking Division. There was 3 sergeants and myself went to a town in just close to Montgomery, Alabama, and they were, of course, Minnesota. The sergeants were all Minnesota National Guard troops, all home boys, and if you were at that time, if you was from Minnesota in the National Guard, you was all right. If you was if you were a regular Army or one of these fill-ins that from the draftees, why promotions and stuff there were nil. You had to be one of the guardsmen to get anything. But I was friendly with these sergeants, and I had the only car. I owned the car, and they didn't. So we went up to this town, and we was there. That was a Friday night, and we, of course, had inspections every Saturday morning. So on time to leave, we got back and blew a tire out, had no spare. So we sit there at this town, which was Greenville, Alabama. It was a college town, until the filling station opened the next morning where we could get a tire. Of course, when we got back, that left us missing the inspection. So, which meant that you was AWOL. So the first sergeant made me dig a 6x6 hole in the driveway of our place, which was extremely hard ground. And while I was digging, the cooks from the next battery came up and helped me dig, and they brought up water to pour in the hole to soften the ground. Very nice bunch of cooks. They felt sorry for me up there digging out there. You know, the sergeants didn't receive anything. There was no mention. I was the only one that received any punishment for being late. That was a kind of looking back on it, it's kind of humorous because they didn't get anything on being all in as guard troops, you know. And they're all neighbors up there, all from the same town up in Minnesota.
Along came the armistice, your discharge as a sergeant, but you go AWOL again by mistake. Do I remember that?
Oh,
You
well,
want to talk about the armistice?
well, no, at that time, the day they signed the armistice, the next day, I was shipped out from Korea and came back to the United States. And they sent me down to Fort Carson for 2 weeks for reassignment. And then they sent me to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, where I was artillery instructor there until I was discharged in March of '54. Yeah.
Do you have any reflections you want to share with us on your activity in Korea and our country's involvement?
Well, you know, if I had it to do over, I'd probably go over there again. I think that we did a service there. The Korean people from the South, they're free, have free elections. The North Koreans are in a state of absolute poverty. If you listen to all the newscasts and reports that are coming out of North Korea, which are really not very many because they don't allow anybody in. But you know, they've threatened with us with nuclear weapons and whatnot. And the South Koreans are a very protective country. They're producing automobiles, stuff, farm. There's free elections there. I think it would definitely have been a communist country if we hadn't stepped in. I'd go back again.